February 3rd, 2019. Palm Springs, California. What should have been an ordinary Sunday night for four young friends became the deadliest mass murder in the desert resort city's recent history. In less than an hour, Carlos Campos Rivera, 25, Larin Garcia, 17, Jacob Montgomery, 19, and Juan Duarte Raya, 18, would all be gunned down in cold blood. The killer? Someone they trusted. Someone who had been hanging out with them just hours before. Someone who would later brag about the murders to an undercover agent, saying he felt no remorse and describing the victims as just numbers. But this isn't just a story about a horrific crime. It's about an investigation that would span years, feature dramatic courtroom twists, a deadlocked jury that couldn't reach a verdict, and undercover operations that would ultimately expose the killer's chilling mindset. It's about four families destroyed, a community shaken, and a justice system that refused to give up. The defendant was 19-year-old Jose Vladimir Larin Garcia, and the evidence against him would include his own recorded confessions to fellow inmates who were actually undercover agents. But his defense team had a shocking strategy. They claimed someone else entirely was responsible for the murders. This is the complete story of the Palm Springs quadruple murder case and how investigators finally secured justice for four young victims whose lives were cut tragically short. Before we dive into this heartbreaking case, I want to take a moment to acknowledge something important. True crime content exists to honor victims' memories and help us understand how justice works, both when it succeeds and when it fails. If you believe in sharing these stories respectfully and supporting the families who have endured unimaginable loss, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue telling these important stories and ensures that victims like Carlos, Juliana, Jacob, and Juan are remembered not just for how they died, but for how they lived. To understand the full impact of this tragedy, we need to meet the four young people whose lives were stolen that February night in Palm Springs. This wasn't a random crime or a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. These were friends, people who knew their killer, people who had no reason to fear the person who would ultimately end their lives. Carlos Campos Rivera was 25 years old, the oldest of the group. He was working hard to build a life for himself in the Coachella Valley, that stretch of desert communities in Riverside County that includes Palm Springs, Desert Hot Springs, Cathedral City, and other cities nestled between the San Bernardino Mountains and the desert floor. Carlos was known for his friendly demeanor and his willingness to help friends when they needed it. Larin Garcia was just 17 years old, the youngest victim and still in high school. Despite sharing a last name with the defendant, she was not related to Jose Larin Garcia. Juliana was described by those who knew her as vibrant and full of life, with dreams and plans that would never be fulfilled. At 17, she should have been worrying about graduation, college plans, and all the normal concerns of teenage life. Jacob Montgomery, 19, was exactly the same age as the man who would kill him. Jacob was at that crucial transition point between adolescence and adulthood, figuring out his path in life and building friendships that he thought would last for years to come. He had no way of knowing that his life would end before his 20th birthday. Juan Duarte Raya, 18, was also just beginning his adult life. Like the others, he was part of the tight-knit community of young people in the Palm Springs area where everyone seemed to know everyone else, and where violent crime, especially on this scale, was virtually unheard of. The Palm Springs area where these murders occurred is known worldwide as a desert resort destination, famous for its golf courses, spas, and as a retreat for celebrities and tourists. But behind the glamorous facade, it's also home to working-class families, young people trying to make their way in the world, and communities dealing with the same social and economic challenges found anywhere in America. What made this case particularly shocking wasn't just the number of victims, but the fact that this was clearly an act of violence committed by someone within their social circle. This wasn't a stranger danger situation or a random act of violence. This was betrayal of the most fundamental kind. February 3rd, 2019, started as an ordinary Sunday for the group of friends. The exact details of how they spent their day together remain part of the court record. But what's clear is that Jose Larin Garcia was with the victims for at least part of the day. This wasn't a situation where the killer stalked strangers. He knew these people, had spent time with them, and had gained their trust. The murders occurred on February 3, 2019, claiming the lives of Carlos Campos Rivera, 25, Juliana Garcia, 17, Jacob Montgomery, 19, and Juan Duarte Raya, 18. The shooting happened in Palm Springs, but the exact location and circumstances would become crucial elements in the prosecution's case against Larin Garcia. What investigators would later piece together was a timeline of horror that unfolded rapidly. The evidence suggested that the 4 victims were shot in quick succession, giving them little chance to escape or defend themselves. The brutality of the crime scene would shock even experienced homicide detectives who had seen their share of violent crimes. The discovery of the bodies led to an immediate and intensive investigation by the Palm Springs Police Department, working in coordination with the Riverside County Sheriff's Office and other agencies. The crime scene was processed meticulously, with investigators collecting bullet casings, analyzing blood spatter patterns, and looking for any physical evidence that might lead them to the killer. Department of Justice Forensic Specialist Nancy McCombs testified that the multiple bullet casings that were recovered could have come from the same gun, though no weapon was ever found in the investigation. This missing murder weapon would become a key challenge for prosecutors, forcing them to build their case on other forms of evidence. Early in the investigation, detectives began looking closely at the victims' social circles, trying to understand who might have had motive, means, and opportunity to commit such a horrific crime. Jose Larin Garcia quickly emerged as a person of interest. But building a case strong enough for prosecution would take time and innovative investigative techniques. One of the most intriguing aspects of the case was the involvement of another young man named John Olvera, who would later become central to the defense's strategy. Police investigated posts on Olvera's social media accounts that appeared to take credit for the murders, but Olvera testified that in several instances he was publishing rap lyrics or fronting as a wannabe gangster. This social media evidence created a complex dynamic for investigators. In an era where young people often post provocative content online without thinking through the consequences, distinguishing between genuine confessions and fake bravado became a crucial skill for detectives working the case. The arrest of Jose Larin Garcia came after weeks of investigation, but getting him charged was only the beginning of a legal battle that would stretch on for years. The case against him would ultimately rely heavily on what he said to people he thought were fellow inmates, but who were actually undercover law enforcement agents. The investigation into the Palm Springs quadruple murder showcased both traditional detective work and modern undercover techniques that would prove crucial to securing a conviction. With no murder weapon recovered and a crime scene that, while providing some forensic evidence, didn't immediately point to a single suspect, investigators had to get creative. One of the most significant investigative breakthroughs came through the use of undercover agents placed in the jail where Jose Larin Garcia was being held. An undercover agent gave testimony about what the accused quadruple murderer told him while he was posing as an inmate in jail, with Larin Garcia being recorded and observed by undercover agents while in custody. This type of undercover operation is extremely sophisticated and requires careful legal approval. Undercover agents must be thoroughly trained not only in maintaining their cover identity, but also in the legal requirements for gathering admissible evidence. Everything they do must be documented, recorded when possible, and conducted within the bounds of the suspect's constitutional rights. What these undercover agents discovered was chilling. According to trial testimony, Larin Garcia didn't just admit to the murders. He showed a shocking lack of remorse and described the victims in dehumanizing terms. These recorded conversations would become some of the most powerful evidence in the prosecution's case. The investigation also had to grapple with the social media posts made by John Olvera, the young man the defense would later claim was the real killer. Larin Garcia's attorneys said Olvera committed the murders, and police had investigated posts on his social media accounts that appeared to take credit for the murders. This required investigators to carefully analyze social media content, distinguish between genuine admissions and posturing, and ultimately determine which person was actually responsible. Phone records became another crucial element of the investigation. A friend of the defendant testified about a key phone call during Larin Garcia's retrial. These telecommunications records helped establish timelines, place people in specific locations, and corroborate other evidence in the case. The forensic analysis of the crime scene provided additional pieces of the puzzle. While no murder weapon was found, the bullet casings and other physical evidence helped investigators understand how the crime unfolded and supported their theory of the case. Crime scene reconstruction experts worked to determine shooting angles, the sequence of events, and other details that would be crucial for presenting the case to a jury. Perhaps most importantly, investigators had to build a comprehensive understanding of the relationships between all the people involved. This wasn't a case where a stranger attacked random victims. The social dynamics, personal histories, and interpersonal conflicts within this group of young people all had to be carefully documented and understood. The path to justice in the Palm Springs quadruple murder case was neither quick nor simple. Jose Larin Garcia's first trial, which began in early 2022, ended in dramatic fashion when the jury reported to the judge that after nearly 6 days of deliberations, they were hopelessly deadlocked in their decision, resulting in a mistrial being declared. A deadlocked jury in a capital murder case is every prosecutor's nightmare and every defense attorney's hope. It meant that despite weeks of testimony, compelling evidence, and detailed arguments from both sides, the 12 jurors simply could not reach unanimous agreement on Larin Garcia's guilt or innocence. But the Riverside County District Attorney's Office wasn't giving up. They immediately announced their intention to retry the case, setting the stage for a second trial that would begin in late 2022. The retrial would feature much of the same evidence, but with refined strategies from both prosecution and defense teams, who had learned from the first jury's reaction. The second trial proved more decisive. A jury found Jose Larin Garcia guilty on all counts against him, with the decision reached after less than an hour of deliberations following months of testimony. The swift deliberation in the retrial stood in stark contrast to the weeks of deadlock in the first trial, suggesting that the prosecution's refined presentation of the evidence had been more effective. Larin Garcia was found guilty of first-degree murder on all 4 counts: Juan Duarte Raya, Juliana Garcia, Jacob Montgomery, and Carlos Campos Rivera. But a guilty verdict was only the first step. The same jury would now have to decide whether he should receive the death penalty. Jose Larin Garcia was sentenced to death in February 2024, nearly a year after his conviction, with the case facing several delays before the final sentencing. The death sentence represented the ultimate judgment that the jury believed this crime warranted the most severe punishment available under California law. The Palm Springs quadruple murder case serves as a sobering reminder that the most devastating crimes often come from within our own communities, perpetrated by people victims know and trust. 4 young people, Carlos, Juliana, Jacob, and Juan, lost their lives not to a stranger or in a random act of violence, but to someone who had been part of their social circle. The case also demonstrates the evolution of modern criminal investigation, where traditional detective work must be combined with sophisticated undercover operations, social media analysis, and advanced forensic techniques. The fact that it took 2 trials to secure a conviction shows how complex these cases can be, even when the evidence seems overwhelming. For the families of the victims, no verdict can truly provide closure or bring back their loved ones. But the successful prosecution of Jose Larin Garcia ensures that he will be held accountable for taking 4 lives and devastating multiple families and communities. Cases like this remind us why it's so important to share these stories thoughtfully and respectfully. The families of Carlos Campos Rivera, Juliana Garcia, Jacob Montgomery, and Juan Duarte Raya deserve to have their loved ones remembered as real people who mattered, not just as statistics or headlines. If this case has impacted you the way it impacted me, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting that like button. Your support helps us continue bringing you well-researched, respectful coverage of cases that deserve to be remembered. Thank you for watching, and thank you for helping us honor these victims' memories.